Here we are, lecture 5A, and we're going to continue where 4B left off, looking at how animals, some of the strategies that animals have for dealing with the stresses of winter, and maybe get into some more specifics. In lecture 4B, we were looking at some generalities like um, coverings, skin and body coverings that evolved to allow animals to live in terrestrial environments. And these coverings, right, these animals no longer were living bathed in water in an aquatic environment, and so they had to evolve some kind of a surface to prevent them from drying out. And this included things like a chitinous exoskeleton in insects, for instance, or skin or scales in certain vertebrates. Well, today we'll look at some more specific strategies, and I'm starting off with this. I showed you this figure last class. I use it in my zoology class. It's from the zoology textbook, and it does a good job of showing us all of the different groups of animals. And in our conversation today, even though we've got lots of really interesting, amazing, and important animals, our focus is going to be looking at the phylum Chordata, it's the vertebrates, and specifically, mostly mammals and birds. We just don't have the time to look at all the different strategies that maybe members of the phylum arthropods have for dealing with the winter conditions. Well, here's a picture of this agricultural dugout that's right near our house, and I think I've shown you pictures maybe from here before. But if I look at a shot from it in the summertime and in the wintertime, for reference, for scale, I don't know, we can see trees. This here is a hockey net, so it's not a very big pond, but I think this contrast of summer and winter shots of this pond emphasizes the two main or big problems that face animals in the wintertime. And we can summarize these by saying intense cold, and looking at this picture, green versus white, and we know that green means chlorophyll, chlorophyll means primary production or photosynthesis, and we know that that means the base of these terrestrial food webs and the base of this aquatic food web as well. In the wintertime, we just talked in past lectures about how different strategies that plants have for dealing with the winter, like this deciduous tree that's lost all its leaves now and isn't photosynthesizing, or these grasses here. This is actually an invasive reed canary grass, but it's gone to seed, and this material here is no longer photosynthesizing. So cold, yeah, and food scarcity. So we'll look at strategies that animals have to deal with these problems. And maybe the biggest problem, or sorry, maybe the first strategy that might come to mind, quick solution, is to migrate, to leave the area when it's winter. And I've got this snip I took from the Canadian Snowbird Association. So if we didn't know anything about this association or this term here, and looking at their logo, we might think this would be a good have some good information on this website talking about how animals like Canada geese and other birds deal with winter conditions. But maybe some of you know already that this Canadian Snowbird Association and that term Canadian snowbirds is often associated with humans, typically older humans, that migrate every fall to avoid our cold winters. Well, that's an example of seasonal migration. I specify here that we're talking about seasonal migration because we have other types of migrations that we see. Like we've got a really important migration that takes place uh, every day, and it takes place in the ocean, and we call it diel, coming from the Greek or Latin, I think, for day. But here we're looking at a vertical migration that takes place every day with members of the water column communities migrating vertically to depth during the daytime. You know, strategies for doing this. Some of these are prey items for sight predators, so they can hide out in the dark, in the depths during the day, and then at night they can resurface or move up and feed upon things in the upper portions or the lit portions of the water column. While this is really interesting, and perhaps you'll have a chance to study this in other classes, we're not looking at diel migrations, we're looking at seasonal migrations. And also, we're not looking at, remember I mentioned in that first slide, we're going to be mostly focusing on chordates or vertebrates and not things like the monarch butterfly. But we do want to recognize at least that these animals also undergo amazing seasonal migration, as can be seen in this figure. And if you want to learn more about this, you can click on, sorry, my dog is bothering my computer mouse here. You can click on this and get more information. But interesting to see, look at that northern extent um, of their habitat is based on an important food source for them, and that's that milkweed. But we can see that their northern portion of their range, of the monarch range, actually does extend into, right around where our field station is going to be located in at least this portion of the boreal shield ecozone. Okay, so we're not looking at monarchs in much detail. We're going to be focusing more on vertebrates, but here we can define the seasonal migration as large-scale seasonal movement of a species to a different habitat or different environment. And why are they doing this? Well, they're doing this to avoid things like extreme cold and food scarcity. So here we have whale migrations, and they are a chordate, and these marine migrations for different species. Wow, they're really long. But again, we're not going to be focusing on marine migrations, even though some of these are seasonal. Um, but and some of them do occur. Well, look at the orca here. But we're going to be focusing on the more or less the boreal shield ecozone on animals that use the terrestrial environment. And when we do that, we're going to look at animals that seasonally migrate by flying. We use the term aerial migration, I guess, and those that walk on the land. They don't fly. They migrate. Hey, get off of there. Sorry, my dog is chewing on something. He's a puppy, so he's kind of rambunctious right now. Okay, if I look at this, first of all, these days it's important to find out or to know where you're getting your information from. And so I see this insignia here, this logo for Ducks Unlimited Canada. And some of you may have heard or recognize this logo. And Ducks Unlimited is Canada's first conservation company or organization, started way back in the late 1930s. And they are uh, experts in things like waterfowl and wetlands. So this just gives me some confidence on the accuracy of this figure. But look at this. Some of us may have seen these snow geese as they migrate through. But what an amazing migration from way up here in northern Canada all the way down to, well, these are data from banding. Looks like they've got some here, even southern Mexico, close to Guatemala. But pretty amazing aerial migration. So let's focus more on some of the aspects of aerial migration, maybe thinking back to Canada geese. Um, and I showed you that last slide with the Ducks Unlimited logo on it. Well, here's another logo for the Cornell lab, or the Cornell Ornithological Lab. And again, when we're thinking about information from reputable sources and websites, well, these guys, this lab is a leader in the study of birds. So some of this information comes from them today, looking at um, the how, where, and why some birds like Canada geese migrate. Well, remember cold and food scarcity. These are things, these are some problems that animals face in the wintertime. And so typically when we look at migration of geese and birds, typically it's from areas of low or decreasing resources to areas of high or increasing resources. And for waterfowl, like these Canada geese that are flying over, I took this picture in Winnipeg. Um, their two resources that they're looking for are food, so that's going to get scarce in the wintertime, and that's going to drive them to the south, and nesting locations. And that is one of the reasons why these things migrate back up to the north, because of the amazing numbers, the numerous nesting sites that we have here in Canada, all those wetland areas that provide really good nesting habitat for certain types of waterfowl. So, this is really advantageous for these birds to migrate, and it must be because it's very dangerous. So these migrations um, are really demanding. Look at all the things that could go wrong as they fly these great distances. And, in that first year, that first migration, we see huge mortalities, up to maybe 75% for some birds. But the reason they're doing it is because the benefits of migrating, finding food sources, finding nesting locations is outweighs the risks associated with the migration. What are some of the triggers for when it's time for these birds to start thinking about migrating? Well, this is the great thing about if you want to pursue a career in ecology, um, maybe it's going to be looking at um, waterfowl ecology. Maybe it's going to look at why birds migrate, and that would be great. There'd be a lot of great research opportunities because we still don't fully understand what the triggers are. There's a number of them, and they can vary, and they can be different combinations of some things. But we have a bit of an idea, like the change in day length. So here's a picture in the fall. We know that as we get later in the fall, daylight hours get shorter and shorter until we reach that winter solstice. Lower temperatures and changes in food supplies are all things that can contribute to triggering these birds to make them think, oh, it looks like it's time to migrate south. Well, how do they navigate? Um, a lot of us, maybe if we're in a new city nowadays, we can access Google Maps, and that makes navigating pretty easy in places we've never been before. In the past, when we didn't have Google Maps. Maybe some of us used actual paper maps, and even further back, maybe some of us even used compasses that have arrows that point to the magnetic north. Well, birds obviously aren't using Google Earth, but they have some amazing navigational skills. And again, just like we don't fully understand what triggers the migration timing, we also don't have a full understanding of all the navigational skills that birds can use in their migration. But they do use things like information from the sun, from stars, from the Earth's magnetic field. Uh, they also look at where the sun is setting, and maybe also look at certain landmarks. And we can identify four different main flyways in North America. And we see that, here in Manitoba, um, we have sections of the Central Flyway and the Mississippi Flyway. And, we've got amazing opportunities to see tremendous biodiversity in terms of bird watching at different times of the year. This information comes from the Audubon Society. And again, this is a really reputable source of information. Um, but we do also want to recognize that this organization is named after someone, one of the United States' most famous naturalist, John James Audubon. But it has come to light more publicly as recently that this person was a slave owner, and really had there's a lot of questions about um, sort of how he treated people, and he has left this racist legacy that, if the Audubon Society continues to keep his name, it needs to at least recognize this, and they've done so recently on their website. Um, but it's something I think that they're they're grappling with right now, or as stated here, but trying to understand the history of their society and who they're named after. Okay, well, let's keep on thinking about aerial migrations. And this map here, I think this map is coming from Cornell, the Cornell lab, and it's showing me breeding, non-breeding, and year-round locations for Canada geese. So remember, they're flying north in the summertime or in the springtime because they're looking for nesting sites, and then they head south in the winter because of the stresses of food scarcity and the cold. But I see that there's some locations, like in the dark purple here, where we have resident populations year round. In fact, if we think about, seeing how accurate this map is, um, okay, I'm not sure how they exactly define year round because most of the geese, Canada geese in Manitoba, when they fly south, there's a group of them that only go they either go as far south as Missouri right here, so they're not going that far south. And there's also a group population that only migrates to Rochester. So if you know where Minneapolis, St. Paul, Twin Cities are, just a little further southeast of that, but where my cursor is Rochester. It's the home of the Mayo Clinic. Maybe you've heard of the Mayo Clinic. It's a very famous um, health institution. Anyway, we see that our Canada geese population doesn't head that far south when they migrate. But when we've talked a little bit in this class thinking about climate change, and we mentioned it last class thinking about climate change and the northern tree line. What about climate change and increasing numbers of moving that resident year-round population line further north? It could be happening. Here in Manitoba, and Winnipeg, this is where this information is coming from. Perhaps some of you have encountered our really large Canada goose population that lives in Winnipeg. And, we have a reprieve from these guys in the wintertime when they migrate south. But with warmer temperatures, climate change, and Canada geese basically just need some open ice, some open water areas, and they have strategies for dealing with some of the cold. But if they have open water, they have access to food, and so there is a concern that perhaps our resident population that we see here in Winnipeg might at some point become a seasonal or all year population. And um, there are management tools or techniques in place that the city uses to help reduce the goose population in Winnipeg. These can include things like egg removal and nest destruction. So I used to work for Ducks Unlimited, and we were sometimes hired to deal with pest Canada geese populations, and so we could get permits from Canadian Wildlife, federal permits to remove nests, or sorry, remove eggs at a certain time of year and destroy the nests. And if you do it early enough in the season, those Canada geese will move on and nest, hopefully somewhere outside of the city. Well, if you're interested in more about uh, Winnipeg's goose population, um, you could look at that website I just showed you. There's also this fairly recent movie that was premiered at the Toronto International Film Fest. I don't know if they had any of these geese walking the red carpet, but it was made by a Winnipeg filmmaker, and a lot of the scenes are from Winnipeg. So you can find it. I'm sure you can find it. I found it online a while back and watched it. Well, let's move from aerial migrations to terrestrial migrations. And, you know, um, here again, we want to think about why are these animals moving? And in this case, well, we have those stresses of cold and lack of food. In this case, we're thinking about barren ground caribou, and they're migrating south in the wintertime because they're looking for areas of good food abundance and easy access to that food, which means shallow snow depths because they're going to have to dig through the snow to get to that rainbow lichen or uh, rainbow reindeer lichen that we talked about in past classes. And I see here, okay, I've got it. I've included this video, and this comes from the WWF. You know, the WWF now stands only for the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, and here's its symbol, the panda, and again, a pretty reputable source of information. Back in the 90s, I believe, um, they filed a lawsuit against the other WWF, which was the World Wrestling Federation, and they won. These guys won, and because they wanted to be the sole owners of this acronym, the WWF. Okay, so I've included this link here. Great little introduction to barren ground caribou. Um, and if we think about why they're migrating and our populations here in Manitoba, we have this herd or population. If you remember what a population was, I think we defined it in one of the first classes. We're looking at a group of the same species living in the same time and place that can interbreed or that interbreeds. So we've got this herd or population, and I'm going to mispronounce this, I know, but it's the Kermanajak population. And if we think about their migration and look at this map, so try to find points of reference when you're looking at a map. Um, so what can we see here? Well, maybe some of us know some of these names of these communities, like we've talked about. Maybe we've talked about Tuduli Lake. So I see Tuduli Lake is right here. Here's Brochet. I'm not sure why they didn't put Lac Brochet on here, um, but they've shown the range of this caribou herd, and we can see that its southern range here extends into the Boreal Shield ecozone, one that we spent a lot of time talking about in this class. So they're migrating south in the wintertime. So we're thinking about those winter stresses. And what's triggering this migration is colder temperatures and food is getting short. Maybe also sunlight hours might help as well. And they've learned these migration routes through generations, um, and they're following them and they head down south where they have a better food supply in the wintertime. They can dig not as much snow, they can dig through that snow and access that lichen. Okay, well, I wanted to show you a couple other maps. These are coming from the group that manages these herds. And um, let's take a look at this map here. So we're looking at the blue and the green, kind of this color swatch, light green to dark blue, for this caribou herd population that makes its way into this boreal shield ecozone in the summertime, sorry, in the wintertime. And if we look at this map, this is this is an insane distance for a terrestrial animal to migrate. And we're looking at hundreds of kilometers here. And if we look at another map of the same area, but this one now shows um, development. So the legend is kind of small here, so I snipped it and tried to make it bigger here. What's going on? Well, I can see these gold bar looking things. This is where people are looking for gold. Um, and the other thing that they're looking for is these blue triangle things. What's this? This is uranium. What are we looking for gold for? Why are we looking for uranium? I'll let you try and figure that out. But whoever's looking for it, one of the main reasons they're looking for it is because it's going to generate a lot of money for them. But I see that, this tremendous distance that these caribou are needing to migrate is pocked full of potential mine operations. What is that going to do in terms of cues that caribou need for their migration? I'm not sure. Probably is going to disrupt them to some extent, and people are currently trying to understand that and trying to figure out and have ways to minimize the impact of this development on caribou migration. One thing I also see on this map is a bunch of green, and if I look at that, these are areas with surface and or subsurface restrictions, so areas where these prospectors can't go in and prospect. And what are those areas, or what do they line up with? Well, uh, protected areas. And we had a conversation, I think, in past classes about protected areas. So we can see some existing, protected areas, like the Caribou River Provincial Park. And, there are plans, here's Churchill for reference, there's plans to protect a big area, the Seal River watershed. And hopefully that goes through because that represents a good chunk of the area that caribou need to migrate through on their seasonal migrations. And it'd be great to prevent disruption of that migration that might be caused by mine operations. All right, well, seasonal migration, that's one of the strategies we wanted to talk about. We're going to switch over now to thinking about dormancy. And, for our class and our purposes, we're going to think about dormancy as slowing down an animal's metabolic activity. Why? You want to conserve energy. Why? Because remember, these stresses in the wintertime include lack of resources, lack of food shortage. So uh, you need you need food to burn through cellular respiration to produce energy. So if you can limit how much food you need to burn, then you don't have to eat as much food, and that can bode well if you're planning on staying in this area that's got reduced food availability in the wintertime. And wow, look at this example here, talking about how bats that are dormant in the wintertime can drop their heart rate. It looks like this is about a 95. They're going from like 200 to 300 beats per minute, which is normal for a bat, to about 10. Wow, that's a huge drop. And this information is coming from the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada. Again, another reputable source of information. So under dormancy, we can talk about a number of different types of dormancy, and some people have different definitions of these things, like hibernation and what is true hibernation and what is not. But I think for our purposes, if we can, let's have a conversation, and this will help us understand how some animals deal with that stress of winter. And these animals remain in the setting, right? They're not flying down to Mexico or down to Missouri, or they're not migrating. They're staying in place. They're just becoming dormant. And one of the ways to do that is they can hibernate where they sleep. They build up their energy reserves in the summer and fall, eat a lot, get all that fat, and then in the wintertime, they sleep throughout the whole winter. And when they do that, they're not using a lot of energy. Um, they can drop their body temperature. These bats here are endotherms, right? They're regulating their own body temperature. But to do so requires energy to burn in cellular respiration. So if they can lower their body temperature in hibernation, they don't have to spend as much energy keeping warm. And we looked at that other picture showing how they can also slow their heart rate and their breathing rate during true hibernation, where they don't wake up for the whole winter. Bats are a good example of animals, and we've got this of animals that hibernate in the wintertime, and we've got this um, ubiquitous little brown bat. We see it right across a good portion of Canada, including the boreal shield ecozone. And these little brown bats hibernate from October or November to March or April. So they have a nice long sleep. Well, another type of dormancy is torpor. And what is this? Well, it's an awful lot like hibernation, but these animals that undergo torpor are going to wake up occasionally, or they might wake up regularly to do things. Maybe it's not a lot of activity. Maybe it's just waking up and repositioning a little bit in their den, or it might be a fair bit of activity where they head on out, um, access some food, move around, like we might see with squirrels and skunks. And I've included this. I like this analogy. It was not my own, but I found it on the Fort White Alive's website. Maybe some of you have visited Fort White on the south end of the city of Winnipeg, and it's a great location for people to experience nature. And anyway, they have this idea that if you're comparing torpor and hibernation, maybe torpor is sort of like just locking your cell phone, whereas hibernation would be like doing a hard shutdown and a restart of your cell phone. Okay, so we got some examples of torpor, seasonal torpor. These for black bears, squirrels, and skunks. There's some good examples of animals that undergo seasonal torpor. But we can also see torpor happening even in the summertime in some animals, like this um, sparrow. And you know, uh, on cool nights, this is early in the morning. This picture was taken. This sparrow was uh, in a state of torpor, a resting state, and it's in this state. It's conserving a lot of energy, and then when it warms up a little bit more, um, it's going to come out of that torpor during the daytime. So pretty amazing. Well, let's see. We've got a couple other examples of dormancy, or at least one other one I think that we wanted to talk about or define. And again, um, uh, they're all related. We all They all involve a reduction in metabolic activity, designed to conserve energy and get these animals through. Right, they're wintering in place. They're not part of that Canada Snowbirds Association. They're not heading down to Florida. Okay, so this term brumation, we can think of it as like dormancy in ectotherms. Cold. Sometimes we use the term. It's not really accurate, but it's a common term. Cold-blooded animals. Um, Not really an ecologically sound term to use, but let's use the term ectotherm instead. So we see it's kind of like torpor in ectotherms, let's say like snakes, and maybe some of us have visited the snake hibernacula of the Narcisse area in Manitoba. And if you're interested in seeing these snakes, don't head up there now because they're going to be in brumation, uh, very inactive in their dens. But the Manitoba government, right, I can see that based on this symbol here on their website, they monitor the activity because it's a good tourism uh, destination, tourist destination. So in the springtime, well, we're talking about winter. So let's go here. So in the fall time, you can see the snakes starting to come back to these dens in early September. And they're going to these dens because they provide a great hibernacula or a great location for them to go into in a dormant state throughout the winter. I've included this link here to a short video on the Narcisse snake pits or snake dens, and this comes from the National Geographic. And maybe some of us uh, have read issues of the National Geographic or watched National Geographic channels. Again, a pretty reputable source of information. Um, okay, well, let us switch gears then to the last sort of general strategy, that being adaptation or resistance. So, you know, I was organizing these notes. I guess all those things I just talked about, like migration and dormancy, those are ways animals have adapted. Um, but in this case, we're looking at adaptations to allow them to um, not just be there where when it's wintertime, but to be active out and about on a regular basis. And in order to do that, they have to solve those problems that they're encountering in the winter. Those two big problems of it being really cold outside and there being a lot less food. So one of the ways to get around being when it's really cold out is um, some mammals, for instance, get a thicker and longer winter coat. So, maybe you have a dog that sheds its fur. Um, Perhaps this is still, you know, part of its genome. It's part of its legacy from coming from a wolf, where wolves in the wintertime um, would prepare for the colder season by shedding their summer coats and growing these warmer, thicker, and sometimes longer winter coats that provide more thermal insulation. And we know that, when we talked about thermal conductance, and we saw how air doesn't conduct heat very well. And so if you have more air spaces, you can be have better insulation. So here's a pretty cool micrograph. And look at this one, actually gives us a scale. So this is 100 micrometers. That's what this scale is here. And they're looking at the air. So they've cut a hair from an antelope. Well, we'll recognize that these pronghorn antelopes don't really occur in the boreal shield ecozone. If we want to see these things, we're going to go further west, um, see them around, like, say, the Maple Creek area in Saskatchewan, or a little further west into southern Alberta. But this is does a great job showing how in the wintertime these antelope have hair that have air spaces that are a lot bigger. Maybe it's hard to eyeball this. This is the winter and this is the summer. But this study would have done a statistical analysis, measured a bunch of these, and shown that on average, these air spaces are bigger in the hair from the wintertime as opposed to the hair in the summertime. All right, if you want to read more about the microstructure of animals' hair in the winter versus the summer, here's a really good article from Acta Zoologica. And they didn't have any images in here, that's why I used that other one, but um, talks about how there's more air-filled cells, smaller lower shafts, so different structures of the winter coat as compared to the summer coat. And this alludes to also that in some animals there's also a change in color in their coats, and this change in color can have that additive value of camouflage. So here we have a snowshoe hare, and we've got these in boreal shield ecozone. We see it in the summertime and we see it in the wintertime. And not only is the winter fur warmer, because it probably is thicker or longer and has more air spaces, but it's now a different color that gives it the camouflage benefit in the snow time. And this information came from the Canadian Wildlife Federation, or these photos did. And they used to, on, when TV was a thing, the TV ads, you'd often see ads. Um, I think they started with the Call of the Loon, and then they were called Hinterland Who's Who, and they would give you a short vignette about a certain animal. They still have these Hinterland Who's Who's, but now they're online. Okay, well, with birds, we already talked about the insulative quality of feathers and the down feathers, and how birds can fluff themselves out a bit, um, to even create even more air spaces and a greater insulative power. Um, Birds might also have some behavioral things, like maybe some of us have seen some Canada geese. I don't know. Maybe these are Canada geese in Rochester, Rochester, Minnesota, where we do have some snow cover. But this is where they're going to overwinter, probably because there's some open water habitat around here. But they can stand on one foot while they keep that other foot warm, and then maybe change legs or feet every so often. And maybe you've seen them hiding their bills in the black feathers here of their back, and that allows them to breathe. Kind of like, in the cold, you see people waiting for the bus, and they've got their faces tucked into their, I don't know, their necks, their sleeves of their jacket or their mitts to keep warm, and allows them to breathe warm air. A lot of birds also have this countercurrent heat exchange in their legs. So what's going on here? Um, well, we can see these feet here have no feathers; they have scales, and we wonder maybe how they keep their legs warm and their feet warm. Well, one of the ways they do it is maybe they change the foot that they're standing on every so often, like we saw in that last picture. But these birds also have this counter current heat exchange mechanism in their legs. And what that means is that you have this really close association between um, arteries and veins. And if you've had human anatomy and physiology, or intro to bio, or zoology, or some of these other classes, maybe you know that arteries are blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart, and from, you know roughly where the heart is. So your core body temperature, it's going to be warmer than probably what you have down here. So it's carrying warm blood, oxygenated blood to the feet, to the extremities, and then veins carry blood back to the heart, so it can get pumped to the lungs. Most veins do, so that it can be oxygenated. So with this countercurrent heat exchange, we have this close proximity, like you see in this figure, of veins and arteries, so that there can be some heat being diffused from the warm arterial blood into the cold venous blood. So that is really important system for helping keep the feet of birds warm. Well, let's switch over to thinking about adaptations related to scarcity of food. And uh, This is quite a picture here. Someone's vehicle. Looks like was a great place to stash food. So I think some squirrel or a bunch of squirrels, maybe, I don't know, have used this as a place to stash food for the winter. So, some of these things may not be that readily available. Maybe they're going to be covered in snow if they aren't stashed um, in places that can be accessed easily without using a lot of energy in the wintertime. So food stash is pretty important. We see that with squirrels. We see that with beavers as well, where they'll chop down a lot of young branches and they'll jam them in so that they can access that food easily in the wintertime. This picture is a picture of a gentleman who changed his name to Gray Owl and became, if we want to use the term, a pretend Indian. Back in the 30s, for many years, people assumed he was a First Nation person. Um, an interesting history. We talked about that interesting history of the Audubon and its name. Interesting history here. Um, this person did a lot for Parks Canada and the conservation movement in Canada in let's say in the 30s. Um, but this legacy of pretending to be someone that you're not um, also questions the person's place in history. But a pretty amazing story, though, if you think about this cabin, and you can go and visit this cabin. And it's in a national park in Saskatchewan, but he built this cabin with an access to beaver lodges, and did some studies on looking at beavers and their their access to maybe to food stashes within their lodge in the wintertime. Okay, thinking about food stashes and uh, this little chickadee here in the wintertime, this is pretty incredible thinking about the brain plasticity. I use that term phenotypic plasticity, I think, last class, and we're talking about how those black spruce can present themselves in different ways. It's kind of flexible, like plastic. So when we use that term plasticity, we often say that something is flexible or it can change, let's say. So, these chickadees, they hide their food everywhere. They make all these stashes, and how can they ever remember where they've stashed all their food? Well, studies have shown that their brain grows by 30% in the wintertime, fall and the wintertime. So that allows them to remember where all their food has been stashed. And then it returns back to sort of that pre-fall and winter size in the spring and summer. That's really amazing. Um, and it allows them, right, this is a good strategy for them to deal with the problem of food scarcity in the wintertime. They collect their food in the fall and summer and put it in places where they can access it in the winter. Well, I'm hoping from our conversation today that you can see a picture like this, or maybe you're driving by and see a bird like this. This is a ptarmigan. This picture, I think, was taken somewhere in Yellowknife. And you can say, well, I wonder how this bird deals with these problems presented in the wintertime, like coldness and food scarcity. It hasn't gone anywhere, so it didn't migrate. It doesn't look like it's in dormancy, it's walking around. So hopefully, these are the types of questions you can ask yourself and maybe be better prepared to answer or to seek answers to. And when I think about the ptarmigan and think about urban bird populations, here in Winnipeg, or we're dealing with Canada geese. In places like Yellowknife, you might see bumper stickers like this: "I break for ptarmigan," because we have ptarmigan populations right in the city of Yellowknife. And as an ecologist, thinking about interactions of organisms with their biotic and abiotic environments, sometimes those environments are changing with human activities, And so, how are the ptarmigan interacting with this abiotic environment of a car? I guess it might be biotic as well because it's being driven by somebody. And then also maybe how humans are dealing with um, other parts of their natural world. Okay, we'll see you in the last lecture 5B shortly. Thanks for listening.